Okay, so in this video, I want to highlight a few names that I'm currently looking at and keeping on watch for the following few weeks or so, as well as the past trading week and a few names that have kind of been playing out. Some I basically hold a position in and some I don't. But the first one and probably my favorite setup is IREN here. This is pretty much a picture perfect airplane setup where we get price breakout down here. We get all triggers in bullish orientation. This is basically the first pullback into the weekly trigger with bearish liquidity, and we get the mount back above with bullish liquidity for an entry. It pretty much does not get any simpler than this here. So this was pretty much, this was free, right? So very easy setup. I wish I would have sized in heavier here, but I basically started building a position once we started attacking the weekly trigger down here. I think I started a position, one of these candles here, and I think I'm up about 30 something percent. I think on the 24th is when I started my position, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, so this looks pretty good, and I would think that any revisit towards a daily trigger with bullish liquidity would get bought up and would be an opportunity to add to this position. Yeah, this looks great. When it comes to looking at IREN here through the lens of liquidity triggers, it looks like there's some profit taking up here. This is what lower order LTEs kind of indicate when they spike up like this. So we got some profit taking, but I think this looks very good, and I think eventually we should be able to test LT5 depending on how we test it. If we basically push through it and hold above, I think this should see a lot more upside. But if we reject it, I'm probably going to look to take profits on this soon. Okay, so BABA here looks pretty similar. I didn't get an opportunity to add or to build a position here actually, so I kind of missed out on this, and looking back on it, I should have been creating a position as we attacked the weekly trigger. And especially here when we started getting signs of bullish liquidity returning. But I definitely missed out on this play here. I think this looks great. I think BABA has a lot of room here to the upside. But the main reason I missed out on this was because once we mounted back above the daily trigger, we basically saw a big gap up here. And yeah, I mean, it moved pretty fast here. And I guess this candle was kind of an opportunity to add, but yeah, I just didn't feel comfortable considering I missed out on the initial move there. But I think this looks great, and I think it has a lot more upside. Okay, so this here is a position that I'm currently down on. And I know this looks a little all over the place, but the reason I have the liquidity triggers here is just because I entered this position a little late. I entered once we mounted back above the LT4 and LT6 liquidity triggers here, and I was kind of targeting the LT5 resistance, but yeah, I entered late here, and so I'm currently down on this position about 17%, I think it is. But I think this looks good, and I'll probably cut this if we close below LT7, which is our last support here. We still have bullish liquidity, so I'm expecting this to bounce and make its way back up. Okay, so I think this is another excellent example of an airplane setup, kind of like IREN, and it looks very similar. But yeah, I mean, it pretty much does not get better than this. So what we have is price revisiting weekly trigger support with bearish liquidity, and then we have flashes of bullish liquidity, which calls for the start of a position, and you can add once you get a candle close back above. But this is very low risk, right? Risk below the weekly trigger. This basically moved almost 70% here in the span of just a month, right? So very low risk. If we look at this through the lens of liquidity triggers, I think we can get a very good idea of what's going on behind the scenes, right? So what we see here is an aggressive bid cascade. Okay, so that just means that buyers are stepping in pretty strongly here. We have all the LTs pointing downwards. and we have bullish liquidity above all triggers. Okay, that's an excellent entry. You could be very confident with bullish liquidity here, just as long as we hold above all LTs, that we should see a pretty strong move up. And that's exactly what we did. Okay, so the next few names that I'm going to highlight, I think, are basically setting up bearishly. So I think all three names are setting up bull traps. And so what we see here is the return of the return of bullish liquidity. This basically indicates that at some point here we should mount back above the daily trigger and try to pay a revisit to this area here. But I think once we revisit these resistance levels and we close back above the daily trigger with bearish liquidity, it should make for a pretty good entry short. If we look at this with the liquidity triggers, we can basically see that everything is basically setting up pretty bearishly. So we have the LTs here and we have the triggers, which the price triggers are not fully bearish just yet. That'll basically happen once the weekly trigger crosses down below the monthly trigger. But the liquidity triggers are set up in a bearish orientation, where we have the LT7 all the way up top here, 6, 5, and 4 set up in that order. That causes for a bearish setup of the triggers. But we have bullish liquidity here. I would figure that this would try to make its way back up and reject these resistances here. And a close back below the daily trigger, like I said, with bearish liquidity would be a very good entry short. Okay, I think Mara stock here looks pretty similar. Okay, yeah, I mean, same thing. We have return of bullish liquidity. I'm gonna assume that we mount the daily trigger here. The weekly trigger is already set up below the monthly trigger here, so the triggers are in fully bearish orientation. I would think that this would try to make its way back up, tap LT5, and then start to make its way back down again. Same thing with SMCI here. So I think all three of these look pretty similar, right? So good chance I would figure that this mounts above LT5, tries to revisit the weekly trigger or this area right here, and then should reject it, close back below the daily trigger, and see an entry for an entry short here with bearish liquidity. So obviously it's a little early to tell with all three of these setups, but I've seen this plenty of times, and just the fact that all of these triggers are set up bearishly, bullish liquidity typically just indicates that we should see a bull trap type of setup here. So the reason why this is a bull trap setup is just because we have all triggers kind of set up bearishly here, both price triggers and liquidity triggers. And if we get price with bullish liquidity try to make its way back up, chances are it's going to get sold again, just because everything's set up bearishly. So I'd be very confident in entry short, just as long as we revisit this area here and close back below the daily trigger with bearish liquidity for continued downside here on this downtrend. Okay, so I do want to consider kind of making these videos every few days or so, maybe once weekly. So if anybody has any comments on any tickers that they want my thoughts on, I'd be more than happy to consider them for the next video. Or if I don't include them in a video, I don't mind sharing my thoughts on X with any setups. Obviously, the names that I'm showing today are all on the daily time frame, but I don't mind sharing my thoughts on lower time frames as well. But yeah, feel free to comment, ask any questions. I'd be more than happy to explain anything or just share my thoughts on anything.